Notice anything different? Five, finally back in studio, and boy, does it feel strange. It was a little weird. So, no more remote setups, no more 2-second delays. We're finally back here face to face. Kind of. Coming back to, people are shedding their masks, and we're starting to get back to normal. COVID cases are near a pandemic low, falling below 10,000 for the first time in more than a year. The TSA says air travel increased nearly 500% this Memorial Day weekend, and tens of millions of people hit the road. And movie theaters, remember those? People went back to the box office this weekend, and ticket sales hit the highest level of the pandemic. But perhaps, maybe the biggest indicator of this return to normal, FOMO. Are people suffering from fear of missing out is making a comeback. I can almost touch you, Sandra. We're going to get back to the table, we think, soon. So how does it feel to be back here?
I'm just appreciating the sock game from all the guys. Jesse, are you participating? Because Harold, Greg, you guys...
Harold, did you know that you were going to get shot head to toe, or was that a mistake?
I got to write that down.
That's good. That's good. You remember the socks. No, there's no doubt a boom going on. The movie theater thing, it kind of surprises me, because how many people pre-pandemic that did not have Netflix or Amazon got it, right? And they can now watch those movies at home, the movie theater. That shocked me, really. What doesn't shock me is people traveling and the numbers that we saw over the weekend. There's a lot of FOMO going on. People kind of did fear that they missed out a lot in 2020, so they're getting back out there, they're traveling again. But remember, you've still got millions of Americans that are working from home. They are mobile. They can get on an airplane, go wherever they want, and continue working on their laptop. They can travel more than they ever did pre-pandemic. So I think that travel boom is going to be one to watch. I think it's going to continue.
Did you take any trips this weekend, Phil? Where'd you go?
Where did I go? You know what's interesting? I did take a lot of trips without ever leaving my home because I'm a vicarious traveler.
Yes.
To your point about movies, I think you're going to lose a sizable portion of the older male audience who have now gotten used to being able to pause the movie to go to the bathroom. I hated going to movie theaters because there's an argument between your brain and your bladder. Everybody goes, it's true.
When do you decide?
It's true. And then it's like, because you know the moment you get up, you're going to miss like the best part of the movie. And what if there's a line in the bathroom? And what if, there's... Anyway, I'll skip to that. What's the other thing? Oh, here's the other thing. I think that we have to admit that most of America was ahead of us on this, right? Because in the city, everything you do, you'll get sued. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask, somebody's going to sue you. So the biggest cause of delayed openings isn't risk of death, but risk of litigation. Behind every company is just a stream of lawyers scared, crapless that they could get sued. So I predict in 2 years, you're going to see those commercials like, did your employer force you to return to work too soon? You may be entitled to a large settlement. That's going to, because you're going to see COVID.
Yes.
Lastly, I don't have any FOMO because I solved FOMO by, this is my adage, create a life that can't be equaled and you don't need to be anywhere else. Like when I'm going home, I see people having a good time, but I'm going, you know what? I'm going home. There's nothing more fun than being home alone, taking a trip. By the way, it's weird being here.
It is weird.
It's weird because everything's really noisy. Like, did you notice that? Because there's more people?
And cold.
Yeah.
It's cold and noisy.
Well, and it's because I'm staring at you.
Yes.
Do you have FOMO?
I never used to. I'm a recluse, a hermit. Howard Hughes is my man crush. But even the last 14 months have been too much for me, like being trapped in. And I'm starting to do things that I have never done. I went to an all-you-can-drink boozy brunch, surrounded by tables of nothing but like shrieking women, dressed like distant Kardashian cousins, not a man in sight, drunk as all out. And I actually enjoyed myself a little bit.
Did?
Like, I'm going to go to Disney World. I'm planning it. I'm going to go to a water park as soon as I can tan up these albino hams that I have for legs. I'm going to do everything absolutely possible that involves large crowds. Wish me luck. I hope I don't get arrested.
Harold,
I mean, not for for getting in a fight.
do you fear missing out of these bottomless brunches that Dagan is talking about?
I've taken a lot of notes this first segment here, and I might have to call you, Dagan, over the weekend. You know, I'm a little nerdy about the whole thing. I don't mind. I'm like you. I kind of like being at home. I thought I wouldn't like being at home. I was one that loved to go out. I'm not convinced everyone's going to come back into these workplaces like people think. If you look at the productivity and the amount of money people made at home, what these big businesses made, I don't know how you're going to justify, number one, businesses wanting to spend the money for rent and all the other things and people and all the other costs associated with it. And if you're making as much money with people not being at work or being in the workplace, why have them there? Some places you have to be, of course. But I'm going to try to find Dagan on the weekend for this brunch she's talking about.
I will even drink White Claw with you.
By the way, bottomless is not what you think. It means you get free booze.
Right.
Oh, it's not people without pants?
Well, the bar I go to, no pants, but...
Now, I agree with you, Harold. Very productive during the pandemic. I actually wrote a book during the pandemic. It's called How I Saved the World. You can order it now on Amazon. So do you think that's going to keep people home? The businesses are just going to say, hey, you know what? People are working around the clock from their couch. Maybe we should keep it this way.
People learned a way to be super productive working from home. Stanford University is keeping track of this whole, return to work, hybrid models, full return. Only 28% of people who were physically going to an office pre-pandemic say that they will return in a full capacity. To your point, Harold, people don't want to go back to work. The economy might be booming, but they have seen the light. They've experienced life in a different way, and they don't want to go back to the rush hour.
If you're living in a low-cost state where you're not paying any income taxes, like Florida or Texas and Nevada, your boss is going to cut your pay if you're not living in a higher-cost area. They will eventually do that. They'll come in and say, you know what, you're getting the tax break, you're not coming into the office, boom, pay cut.
See, I differ a little bit. I think people are going to make more coming out of this, largely because companies and the economy is doing better. We've shown that we can perform even with this but we didn't think this juxtaposition about being in the office, not being in the office. And I think wages are going to go up. I think you're going to see states that are low tax states end up having to pay employees more, I think, because of a confluence of factors. But
so the red states
don't cut me out of this boozy lunch.
So the red states will lead the recovery, right, Gutfeld?
Haven't they already?
Yes, they have.
I also think that this is going to be a really, really weird couple of months. It feels like the end of the school year for a lot of people, and they're, when they want to TP the yard and empty their lockers. I have a feeling that it's going to get a little crazy.
Like senioritis.
Yeah, I think that senioritis. The people that can go out, they're going to go out in style. It's going to be like a lot of drunken sailors on leave, Dagan. More your style.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
I bet you are.
I've slept a lot in the last 14
at the brunch
months.
this Sunday. Drunken sailors abound. Up next, President Biden promising to spend, tens of billions on racial equality.
President Biden unveiling his administration's plan to combat racial injustice in a speech to mark the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, a horrific event that left more than 300 people dead. Biden promising to spend billions on racial equity and asking Americans to root out systemic racism. So Dagan will...
Millions of white Americans belonged to the Klan, and they weren't even embarrassed by it. They were proud of it. And that hate became embedded systematically and systemically in our laws and our culture. We do ourselves no favors by pretending none of this ever happened, or it doesn't impact us today, because it does still impact us today.
To close the race wealth gap, Harold, to you first on this, does spending money, the massive amounts of money really that he's talking about here and other places, does that fix the problem?
I think it's part of helping to fix the problem. I think sometimes when we talk about racial equity, I think there's a sense that we are saying the country's bad, or we're saying that white people are bad, or we're degrading people. When you can look at it narrowly that way, but I don't think that's what it's really about. If you look at what happened in Greenwood, that community was burned down. Greg and I were having an interesting conversation about this before going on. That community was burned down. It was a successful community, black community economically. So taking efforts and targeting the money and saying, look, we as America, there's no other country on the face of the earth that can go through this and recover and thrive the way we are and have the kind of conversations that we have. So if it makes us a little unsettled, a little uncomfortable having a conversation, so be it. As long as it doesn't come from a place of malice, as long as it comes from a place of trying to make things better. And I give him the benefit of the doubt, the president, and his efforts to try to do that. If the money turns out to be a waste and they need to shift it, reorganize and redo it, but at the start, I think you give him the benefit of the doubt and you try to do it.
Greg, to that interesting conversation you had with Harold, from what we just heard from President Biden, I'm the first president in 100 years, he said, to acknowledge the truth of what took place there in Tulsa.
I had no idea that, I mean, this was not taught to me in high school or college. And I was thinking, is it because I'm on the West Coast? Is that why? But it's, you know, it's a horrible story. I think it's important to talk about it. But that's a separate issue then from this idea of equity. I'm an apostle of Thomas Sowell. So it's like when they shifted from equality to equity, it becomes a different story. It's not everybody wants equality of opportunity, but we understand that the equality of outcome is impossible. And it's harmful. There are certain places where I will the percentage of 5'5" white guys with an Ashkenazi background will not be in the NBA. It'll be less than 0.00%. So we have to ask ourselves, why are we shifting from equality to equity? And it's because we realize that discrimination, deliberate discrimination, is illegal. And we know that it's not happening. Everybody in corporations wants to hire minorities. Colleges want minorities. So then where is the discrimination? It's before that. It has to be before that, because we are seeing problems on the street. We are seeing lots of issues. So it happens. We're meeting this problem too late. And that's where I go back to Thomas Sowell. So he'll bring up 3 areas. What are the 3 areas that have negatively impacted black lives? He'll say the welfare system destroyed the family. He'll say teachers' unions killed competition, school choice, that kills education. The third thing now would be the de-escalation or the defunding of police, which now makes communities where minorities live unsafe. So government bureaucracy by liberals has hurt families, schools, and communities. That's what makes everybody suspicious. Like, what can they do that can make it worse? And that's what you have to worry about, I guess.
If I were a black American and
Who says you're not?
Well, you know I had my DNA tested.
I know.
0.1%. And if I see another white liberal like Joe Biden coming around and saying how they're going to help me, I would shake my head. I mean, for how many years have white liberals said they're going to help black America? And you still have the black poverty rate twice that what white poverty rate is, black unemployment rate twice what white unemployment rate is. You have the black education gap. It's gotten bigger. You've had now less black families intact. Is any of that working, what we're doing? I'm actually thinking now when the government says they want to help blacks, they're actually hurting blacks. Because where did the trillions we already spent go, Joe? Where did they go? Did they go to just the race hustlers that run the federal programs that don't work? Because they didn't go to the people that needed the help. So if someone was saying, I'm going to help you, you know, I'd say, you know what, I'm going to help myself. I'm going to operate my schools, my businesses, my families. I'm going to keep more of my money. And I bet black Americans would thrive if white liberals stopped trying to help them.
I think if the teachers' unions let the education flourish,
exactly,
that would be a big start.
And the Democrat Party is behind it all because they want to call black Americans victims. When black Americans are labeled victims, that means they need help from white liberals, and help means votes. You get votes in exchange for help. Once they're not victims anymore, they don't need help, and then they don't get the votes. So you're going to see the Democratic Party, and I know you agree, because you're shaking your head yes. They keep playing the race card because that keeps victimizing black America, and that keeps the Democrats in power. And that's never going to change. That's never going to change.
So what if I told you from 1920 to 1980, 99% of all loans for homes, residential mortgages in the country, were only provided to white Americans, and at 99.5% of those providing that were the government. And it was an intentional effort on their part. And what if I told you the number one creator of wealth in any family, regardless of what you look like in the country, is in your home? Now, if you deny, the numbers are what they are. And I think there was an intentional effort. I think part of what he's trying to do, and I don't dispute a lot of the things you say about, I mean, when I hear liberals saying they want to solve every problem, I get concerned. In fact, when I hear anyone saying they want to solve every problem, I get a little concerned, but particularly in this space. I think finance, economics, we've got to find ways to tell these stories to remind people what happened. And two, the things you mentioned, those three things that Ms. LaSalle mentioned, there were challenges before. We were trying to address them, and the answers weren't sufficient. That doesn't mean we stop trying. I think we have to continue to offer idea after idea, whether it's conservative or liberal, to try to solve this. I believe from 1920 to 1980, if just 5% of that money had gone to black homeowners, think about how many more black businesses, how many more black homeowners, how many, because remember, the number one determinant for how well you do in school, in this country, public school, is the zip code you come from, regardless. So if you had more money in local communities, more money would go towards schools. We're not going to solve it all here in a minute and a half, but I think there's a lot more to it than what we discussed.
And that does speak to one of the words that you will hear from black Americans who are upset about inequality is ownership. And it goes back to the Tulsa massacre. It goes back to home ownership. That's something that's a word that you will hear and a message that you will hear often. But in terms of liberals, look no further than the liberal bastion of Silicon Valley. I talk about this over and over again. If you look at the percentage of their workforce that is represented by black Americans, it is dismal. It is appalling. In technical jobs, Facebook has less than 2% of people in technical jobs who are black. You mean to tell me over the last 20 years or so, or since these companies were founded, they couldn't have done something about that? Actually going into high schools and pulling people and educating them themselves, they're starting to do that, but it's a little too late. In terms of what Joe Biden wants to do, it might be unconstitutional. Last week, there were 2 courts that blocked Joe Biden's Small Business Administration from handing out benefits based on race. It's $29 billion restaurant relief fund. So you know who gets to the front of the line? It is minorities and women. At the back of the line, it was everybody else. And if that program runs out of money before it gets to someone who is a white man, then you're out of luck. And those two judges, 2 courts have blocked that program so far because you know what? Bias and discrimination is wrong and unconstitutional regardless of the group.
And if you hadn't seen the budget proposal, because it came out Friday late in the day before Memorial Day, you saw that it was in it. All right, I had some in the media admitting that they made a major...
They announced saying members of the press were too quick to dismiss the theory COVID could have leaked from a lab.
I think a lot of people have egg on their face. This was an idea that was first put forward by Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, Donald Trump. And look, some things may be true even if Donald Trump said them.
I think a lot of people on the political left and a lot of people in the media made this mistake. They said, wow, if Tom Cotton is saying something, it can't be true, or they assumed that. And that's not right.
And according to a new report, British intelligence now thinks a leak from that lab in Wuhan could be, quote, feasible. Jesse?
Yes.
I like looking at Greg when I call him. You like that? You like
all white
that?
guys
You
look
like
alike.
that?
I know, I get it.
I did that on
At least you're
purpose.
not looking at Dagan and thinking of me.
You like that, though. What do you think went on here?
Are you talking to me or
What do you think went on here? JG, I'll call you Jesse Gray. What do you think went on here?
I'll tell you exactly what happened. And this is actually the media admitting they're bad at their jobs. Here's Chuck Todd. He says the lab leak got tangled up in politics and conflated with the idea that the Chinese deliberately released it. Who was the one that tangled it? Who was the one that conflated it? It was the media that did that. So you're getting now the media, which they love to talk about themselves. I'm a member of the media. I love to talk about myself, too. But they're the ones screwing up. So then they have to talk about how much they screw up. And it's fun to watch because they're not just saying I made a mistake. They're saying we deliberately made a mistake. They're saying we didn't believe our own head. They're saying we don't believe Republicans. We're biased and we're lazy. And they're admitting that they didn't follow up on this theory because of politics. Now, in what industry do you just cell phone yourself like that and just say you're bad at your job? and then you think you need a pat on the back by admitting that you screwed up. I mean, these people are so self-obsessed that they think they're somehow doing the honorable thing by admitting they made a mistake.
You agree?
Yeah. I think the question now is how does the media handle this constant, to Tom Cotton's most recent point, cover-up that it continues to engage in, not providing any evidence, not bringing any conclusions from the lab, saying that China really still needs to pay. How many journalists are going to learn from their mistake and not shut down any idea that comes from Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo, Tom Cotton, and others, and actually ask the questions? And I think if you bring yourself back to those dark days when we were starting to hear about these sort of ideas and this theory about the Wuhan lab. And it was worrisome to see the mainstream media not digging in, not asking the questions, not even considering that to be a case. And I'm not saying everyone, but many in the media. That's a problem. That's their job.
Dagen, did they get credit for, any of them getting the credit for saying, look, we made a mistake, we should have done this differently? Do you give them a pass?
They didn't say they made a mistake. They said it was Trump's fault. They're still saying it's Trump's fault, that it was an idea floated by Mike Pompeo. No, it wasn't. It was a reasonable thing to question, and it was Tom Cotton in late January last year. Oh, and then there was Bo Tao Xiao of South China University of Technology, who posted a paper about the virus originating possibly from a lab in Wuhan, from the lab in Wuhan. Of course, that paper was taken down, but they were so anti-Trump that they're anti-science, that they're anti-reason, that they're anti-logic, and they're perfectly happy with that, because if they had talked about this lab leak theory last year, Trump might have won. Trump might still be the president, and that was the goal all along. It was purely political. They still can't own their mistake. The fact that they're malicious, makeup-wearing, smug hucksters who spouted Chinese Communist Party propaganda for the last year.
Greg, let's assume that the Chinese that this lab where the leak came from and the press was snookered and was intentional. What do we do going from here? What's the answer to try to prevent this?
This is an interesting problem, because I think the Chinese have us over a barrel of wet bats, because all they have to do is show that we had any bit of funding during this, right? If the United States helped fund this thing, how is the United States going to sue them? We're going to have to sue ourselves, right? Because if we had, I kind of think we had some funding. I keep hearing this story about how they waived these restrictions that allowed the funding to continue. And I imagine that's probably why nothing is going to happen, because we might have our fingers all over those bats. But I like the self-reflection. I agree with Dagen that they're only doing self-reflection because there's no risk of danger involved. Trump already lost. So it's like now it's just meaningless to this. But I think that the weird thing about the media is they're not singularly wrong. They're doubly wrong. So they choose the wrong idea, and they avoid the right idea and then choose the wrong idea. So they're doubly wrong. They say, this Wuhan lab theory didn't work, but we really love Andrew Cuomo and what he's been doing in New York. It's like, no. Or else they'll go and they'll blame DeSantis for something. If you look at every facet of life and how the media impacts it, it's never good, whether it's COVID or it's crime or it's race or it's pro-life matters, whatever it is. When they add a veneer that makes it far more damaging than it has to be and creates unnecessary pain and suffering for a lot of people. I mean, imagine if a surgeon decided not to use an effective therapy on your kid because he went to school with the scientists and they didn't get along. That's the media.
Are you saying if we got rid of all of the media except Fox, we'd have a better country?
Legacy media. Get rid of legacy media. No. I like voices. In fact, to that point, we don't mind being wrong. We don't mind talking about wrong. This was all based on an idea that they couldn't accept the fact that the other side could be right. They can't accept the fact that Trump was right, or Pompeo, or Tim Cotton. Tom Cotton? Tom Cotton.
He goes by Tom.
Tom Cotton.
They took it further. They derided and attacked people who brought up the lab theory, that they called us kooks and conspiracy theorists.
As you can tell, we're excited. Up next, disturbing attacks caught on camera.
Violence surging in cities. A new video shows criminals acting more brazen than ever. In New York City, a man brutally sucker punched a 55-year-old Asian woman. It is sickening. She's now reportedly in stable condition. The suspect charged was apparently arrested 8 times in the past year. 8 times. In San Francisco, a police officer was pummeled by a homeless man until bystanders stepped in to help her. So, Harold, you live in New York, a few blocks from me. I see you all the time. You should wear more clothes when you jog, though.
Okay, keep that between us.
I'm sorry. So this guy was arrested actually 17 times. He's homeless 8 times in the past year. You live here. What do you think? We know there's a spike in crime, but these crimes are very similar. They're not even linked to theft. They're just these. What do you think is the real problem here?
Well, we got to stop it. We need not to defund the police. We need to put as much as we can in the police departments across the country. I think it's naive to think that you can't hold police accountable and fund the police. We should do both. 2, I think there's a mental health issue we've got to address, and I think that's one aspect of the defund the police conversation. It gets caught up. We think badly about it because we talk about defunding police, but we got to think about mental health and what the police do, whether or not we have a different force or force within the force to deal with that. Also have some concerns around bail reform. I think it was well intentioned, but I'm not convinced that we're solving the problem that we wanted to solve. In fact, we may have overreached here. That doesn't mean we shouldn't go back and look at it and try to get it right, but what we have now is not working. And kids, moms and dads, people in every community should feel safe walking outside of their door.
I mean, it's Dagan. It's a creepy atmosphere. It's like because the people that you see committing these acts are not well. And my theory is that when they look at shelters, there's not a place for them. They're not going to the shelters and they're being spun out of prison. They don't care because they just go back into jail, and maybe jail's preferable to the shelters. We gave $800 million to de Blasio's wife to do this Thrive thing. That should have solved more than this, and nothing has happened.
No, that was a boondoggle. Like, you could have thrown that money down in an open manhole in New York City. Part of the problem is and don't mean to disparage police, but with people who are mentally ill, I've seen people. Someone rubbing human excrement on the outside of, say, a CVS, they're not going to arrest that individual. Because with this man who assaulted this Asian woman, he's been arrested 40 times. So under bail reform, every time you get picked up, you aren't held. There's no bail. You're right back out on the street. And then the crimes aren't prosecuted. If they pick up somebody who's mentally ill, that individual might go to, say, Bellevue Hospital for 72 hours. There has been a vast deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill since JFK, quite frankly, and it's only gotten worse, and that means there's not a lot of help for people who really need it, number one. Number 2, just quickly to watch the mayoral primary that's coming up June 22nd. Eric Adams, former retired police captain, strong on police, but Catherine Garcia, who's been backed by the New York Times, she says officers who did not wear masks during last year's protest have to be docked their pay. That's her stance on cops.
Oh,
good.
Jesse, this is New York, but we're seeing lots of stuff all over the country, but we're not seeing much of it in the suburbs. So is this just something that only the city people are dealing with, and is it COVID related? Or?
It is. So thanks for bringing us back to the city, Greg.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. But there's a judge out there who stared in the eyeballs of this deranged lunatic, looked at his rap sheet,
right,
and slammed the gavel down and probably said probation.
Yeah.
And didn't sentence the guy. There's a bad judge out there that could have thrown the book at this guy and didn't. And back in the day, I would have been at the judge's doorstep at 6 a.m. and stuck a mic in his face because he's a villain. And you have to humiliate these judges in order for them to get tougher. Because without a judge that gets tough, you're going to keep rolling out these perps and they're going to keep committing crimes. Situation, liberals love institutionalizing someone that fires off a gun. They're ready to go to court the next day, have the gun seized, have all their constitutional rights taken away from them. But you can have some lunatic out there and sock someone, push them in front of a train, and then the next day they're out on the streets again. You need to institutionalize these people because they're sick.
I'll make this one final point. and you can tie this back to our discussion on the economy. And you look at what's happening in some of these blue states with the defund the police movement or slashing police budgets, and you look at the spike and rise in crime, and then you see video like that just makes your heart hurt. Thank God we're hearing she's in stable condition, that woman. And how do you expect to return full workforce to a city like New York when you see these random awful attacks happening on cities? I mean, for anybody walking down a block in New York right now, I don't feel safe. I don't know. This could happen to anyone, anywhere, at any moment.
I think the thing that is so shocking about this modern type of violence is that it's the victims. Like, who hits an old lady? That's in the back of your head. That's the thing. It's like, who hits an old lady?
Predators go for the weakest.
Yeah,
that's who they're targeting.
But they're not even taking stuff from them. They're just pounding him. And then it's obviously the guy is psychotic. He was on Special K, which is, I don't know what kind of drug that is.
Well, that's why Harold's running through the streets so fast.
Yes.
He's trying to get away from everybody.
All right.
That's why I forget my clothes.
Yeah, there you go. He's got his socks, though.